Du Fu sent to Grand Master of Remonstrance Han Zhu. Today I am unhappy to think of you down in Yueyang. I would fly to you, but instead I am sick in bed. Separated from you in your retirement by this autumn water, as you wash your feet in Lake Dongting and look into the distance. Geese fly by high in the sky, lit by sun and moon. Green sweet gum leaves turn red as autumn frosts begin. All the spirits in heaven are gathering around the Big Dipper, some riding unicorns, some mounted on phoenix. Hibiscus flower flags wave and drift down through misty air. Their shadows cover the flowing water of southern rivers. In the heavenly palace, all are drunk on precious liquor. True sages are now rare at court. Like you, most have withdrawn. I recall that recluse of former days, Master Red Pine, probably the same man as Zhang Liang of the Han era. Earlier, he was at Liu Bang's side when they pacified Chang'an, but his strategic plan was not followed, so he became disillusioned. In the end, he could do nothing about the rise and fall of nations, so he became an ascetic and lived on sweet gum sap. We have always pitied Sima Tan's having been left behind at Zhounan. May the stars grant longer life to you, another Sima Tan. Oh, my old friend, why are you separated from me by the autumn flood? If only I could take you to Chang'an as a gift to the imperial court. So here we have another of the heptasyllabic old-style poems of Du Fu. This was sent to a friend, Han Zhu, and this poem was written very late in the life of Du Fu, in 767, just a couple of years, 2 or 3 years before Du Fu's own death. And it was written, as we can see in the poem itself, in the south, when Du Fu had traveled down the Yangtze River Valley. So, topics of this poem. What is this poem about? Well, it's basically a take on the retired life, which is a very common topic, as we have seen in Chinese poetry. This poem is addressed to a civil servant, to a Confucian that has renounced power and office because his advice was not heeded. So there is a praise of this exemplary figure who has retired because of his purity, because of his noble ideas, to the retired life. Implicitly and in relation with this praise, there is a condemnation of the court, which is not able to appreciate the worthy ones. There are some images describing this court in very imagistic and fantastic language, as in a vision of different Taoist immortals surrounding the heavenly stars. But it's altogether, in the style of Du Fu, in that it's a poem that is quite realistic, even though it talks about leaving office. It is clear that office is still the main objective or the main place where Confucian scholars should be, and renunciation of his position there is only accepted when, his advice is not heeded, which is an implicit criticism of the court. Like, the court is corrupt, it does no longer recruit sages. So retirement is the main topic of this poem, and there's some Taoistic imagery. Also, friendship is evidently a topic. The desire to be with a friend, the desire to communicate with a friend, the desire to get recognition for a friend whom one knows to be worthy. Now let's analyze the poem as usual, couplet by couplet. First, I'd like to say that the poem flows quite naturally, so it's not easy to say that the poem can be easily divided into breaks, but I would say there are 4 sections in the poem, nevertheless. One first section would include the first 3 couplets. These 3 couplets present the background of the situation. They present the time, the place in which the artist, the poet, his living and his contact with his fellow friend. The next main section of the poem includes the flight of fancy, the description of the heavenly court around which the spirits are flying. And that section in its conclusion clearly states that this flight of fancy has been a metaphoric allegory for a symbolic allegory of the real imperial court from which sages are expelled. The next section includes a series of exempla. They are meant to be models of the retired life that are applicable or that are parallel to the case of Master of Remonstrance Han Zhu. Basically, 3 examples: Master Red Pine, Zhang Liang, these 2 are merged, and the great historian Sima Tan. And finally, the last couplet concludes in a roundabout fashion, going back to the beginning, with Du Fu's lamentation for the separation from his friend, and also his desire for being able to present his friend back again at court as a sage, as a noble person that would profit the government. So as I said, let's go couplet by couplet. Today I am unhappy to think of you down in Zhuejiang. I would fly to you, but instead I'm sick in bed. So the poem begins very much like a letter. We said that Du Fu is in the south, he is in the Jiangsu River Valley, but he is separated by that same river, which is very wide, from the town of Yuejiang, which was next to one of the big lakes that surround the Jiangsu, Lake Dongting. So the poet is also sick, so he has an excuse for not being able to physically visit, even though the distance might not be so much, his friend Han Zhu. So he is sending this letter excusing himself because of his sickness, and very soon because of the big waters of the Jiangsu. Perhaps in this poem is set in autumn. Maybe the course of the water, the course of the river in autumn is bigger than usual, or more harder to traverse. Separated from you in your retirement by this autumn water, as you wash your feet in Lake Dongting and look into the distance. So again, the physical separation between the two is not that big, but still they are separated by this big water, one of the biggest rivers in the world. They're probably on opposite sides of the river. Han Zhu is presented as washing his feet in Lake Dongting. Now, the image harks back to a tradition that goes back to the Chu, which we've mentioned previously, the elegies of Chu, which were poems mostly about a retired minister, an exiled minister, Chu Yuan, who was unrecognized by his ruler, and who roamed this region, the Jiangsu and the Dongting Lake area, and committed suicide in one of these rivers because of his unhappiness at his lack of recognition. So in one of the texts of the Chu called The Fisherman, there's a fisherman that meets Chu Yuan, who is wandering around, and Chu Yuan is saying, I'm good and worthy, nobody listens to me. And the fisherman gives him some very practical, sound advice. He says, when the waters of the river are clear, I wash my feet in them. When the waters of the river are muddled, I wash my hands in it. No, it was the other way around, I think. When the waters are muddled, I wash my hands. When they are clear, I wash my hands. When the waters are muddled, I wash my feet. Anyway, it's a metaphor for being in office. That is, in troubled times, don't desire to serve in the government. In peaceful times, be willing to serve in the government. And this is the image here. So he is washing his feet in Lake Dongting, Hangzhou. So we start with an implicit criticism of the times and of the ruler. Yeah? In these troubled times, you have retired, and you are leading the retired life of the wise Confucian, who, although he always wants to serve, is wise enough to know when he should avoid government. Next couplet. Geese fly by, high in the sky, lit by sun and moon. Green, sweet gum leaves turn red as autumn frosts begin. So we had a very clear location in space in the first 2 couplets. In this couplet, we get a clear location in time. It's autumn. Well, the previous couplet already mentioned autumn water, but here we get some of the other typical nature images that accompany autumn. So geese are flying high, returning home. They're the animal that symbolizes autumn above all else. And there's green leaves turning red. The idea was that frosts tinged the leaves. They turned the green leaves of the trees red. And red leaves are also one of the sad, beautiful, but melancholy sights of autumn. Remember, autumn in Chinese tradition is always a sad, melancholy time. Setting a poem in autumn, whether it was really written in autumn or not, creates you could say, a tone, a background note, a background tone. This poem is going to be bittersweet. Its topic, the effect it wants to create is melancholy, as is evident from the fact, as we have been seeing and will continue to see, that it's a poem about giving consolation to a retired friend, saying, okay, you're worthy, it's just the times that are unworthy of you. So with this, we finish the introduction. The next couplet seems to take us in a flight of fancy, which seems more of a li bai than a du fu thing. But in du fu, whenever these flights occur, they're always measured. They are subordinate to an aesthetic and an ideological purpose. Here, we have now a description of the heavens, which flows naturally from the previous couplet, because we had the geese flying in the sky. The gaze of the poet goes up to the sky, to the night sky, and he sees stars and imagines the immortals fluttering around in heaven. But of course, this is not just a flight of fancy. These immortals fluttering in heaven, leading an Epicurean life of pleasure and wine drinking, these images are meant to criticize the real court of the emperor, who is and his ministers, who are devoted to pleasure and not to duty, and who are not hiring the best men for the best positions. So all the spirits in heaven are gathering around the Big Dipper, some riding unicorns, some mounted on phoenix. The Big Dipper is the famous constellation Ursa Majoris, the greatest or the most recognizable constellation in the northern hemisphere. It represents also, in Chinese tradition, the sphere of the sovereign, which is generally placed in the clouds as a heavenly realm. So the spirits are around the big stars of heaven, mounting their different mounts. Hibiscus flower flags wave and drift down through misty air. Their shadows cover the flowing water of southern rivers. We may imagine that these hibiscus flags refer to the rosy mists that float in sunset and in the morning, in sunrise, and they would be seen from the watery, rivery land of the south in mornings and evenings. In the heavenly palace, all are drunk on precious liquor. True sages are now rare at court. Like you, most have withdrawn. So here the flight of fancy finishes, and the poet hammers in the image. So these immortals, these courtiers might be drinking wine and enjoying the gilded life of the capital, but the sage ones are out of the court now. The wise ones are smart enough to have retired, and they're living in exile, self-imposed or otherwise. Among these, Han Zhu is implicitly, of course, or rather explicitly, one of these retired sages. So the next section begins with the parallelism. The first and main parallelism is made with Zhang Liang, and this is a very appropriate parallelism. Now, Zhang Liang, as will be explained very soon, well, it will be mentioned, was a very intelligent strategist. He was one of the key advisors of the first emperor of the Han Dynasty, Liu Bang. And in fact, he was so smart and so good at tactics that his name has become a generic word in the Chinese tradition for a tactician. Just as in the Western tradition, the personal name of the Dr. Galen has become a common name referring to doctors. So Zhang Liang was a master strategist. He helped his ruler to enter the capital area, Chang'an. It wasn't called Chang'an then. It was the Qin capital, Xiangyang. But it wasn't the same place, just a few kilometers, from the Tang dynasty, Chang'an. And after not being heeded, he retired. And in later legends, he was associated with one of the Taoist sages who attained immortality, Master Redpine. I say the comparison is very adequate because Han Zhu accompanied the emperor, Emperor Suzong, the successor of Xuanzong. He was with the emperor when the capital was recovered from the rebels during the An Lushan rebellion, and he also decided to quit because his advice wasn't heeded by the emperor. So this first exemplar, is very appropriate, very adequate for praising Han Zhu, although a bit hyperbolic, we could say. So I recall that recluse of former days, Master Red Pine, probably the same man as Zhang Liang of the Han era. Earlier, he was at Liu Bang's side when they pacified Chang'an, but his strategic plan was not followed, so he became disillusioned. In the end, he could do nothing about the rise and fall of nations, so he became an ascetic and lived on sweet gum sap. In this mini-story of Zhang Liang, we get also the mini-story of Han Zhu, although we might assume that Han Zhu did not really become an ascetic, and he probably led a quite pleasant and retired life in Zhuejiang. The next couplets paint the other simile, the other exemplar, which is less directly connected, I think, to Han Zhu's life, which is Sima Tan. Sima Tan was a great historian, also of the Han Dynasty. That was his title, in fact, the Grand Astrologer or Grand Historian. He served the greatest, arguably the greatest Han Dynasty emperor, Han Wudi. And in the episode that is explained in the next couplet, he was not that much appreciated by the emperor, who made one of the ceremonial rituals of the court without him, which was the visit to Mount Tai to do some rituals there. And it is said that Sima Tan died heartbroken a few years later as a consequence of this lack of appreciation of the emperor. His son, Sima Qian, would become much more famous than his father. He would be the grand historian, the compiler of the first great historical Chinese text, the Shiji, the Annals of the Great Historian, which are the foundation stone of all Chinese historiography. So here the connection between Sima Tan and Han Zhu would be, again, the wise minister that is not paid heed, that is not listened to, that is not appreciated as he deserves. We have always pitied Sima Tan's having been left behind at Zhounan. May the stars grant longer life to you, another Sima Tan. So Zhounan was the capital area, south of the capital area. And this simile is a bit darker than the previous one, because after all, Zhang Liang attained immortality. So to soften it up, Du Fu says, okay, but I wish you a longer life than Sima Tan's had, friend? Finally, we get the conclusion. Oh, my old friend, why are you separated from me by the autumn flood? If only I could take you to Chang'an as a gift to the imperial court. So the final couplet, as I said before, brings us back to the beginning. Du Fu and Han Zhu were separated by the water. At the end, they're still separated, and Du Fu once more laments the separation. He wants to join his friend. He is separated by the waters. But he expresses another wish also. Yeah? I wish I could take you back to the capital to present you. So it was typical until the Tang era for worthies, sage, wise, worthy people to be recruited for the imperial administration by recommendation. So a local governor or prefect could mention that one of his neighbors was a very worthy, outstanding person, and could recommend him to the court. So Du Fu, at this time, he was no powerful provincial official or anything like it, but he's playing with this image of the possibility, the desirability of presenting sage and wise people to the court so that they can serve in office and improve the country. So Du Fu concludes with this final homage to his friend. I know you've retired and you're leading the retired life. We've implicitly criticized the court, which does not recognize your merit and follow your instructions, but still I wish, if only, because you are a really meritorious person, if only I could take you to the court again, I would gather great honor for myself after presenting a sage, a worthy minister to the crown. I would borrow your glory and your merit. So quite a nice poem by Du Fu as usual, a bit flattering. I imagine however virtuous Han Zhu might have been, he was certainly no Zhang Liang, I imagine. But it's a nice poem, a nice take on the Confucian when he is not striving for serving in office, when he is reflecting or commenting on the retired life, which Confucian saw as a lesser evil, sometimes necessary, but always an evil nevertheless.